Eminem is the most successful rapper of all time. He is extremely well respected amongst his peers, he has a rabid fan base, he is still among the most streamed music acts in the world, and after 25 years, he is still extremely angry that he is not loved enough. Every couple of years, Eminem goes through the same cycle with his music. He sticks his neck out there and tries something commercial. People say, wow, that's so embarrassing, why did he do that? He gets really angry and makes some rappity raps about how angry he is with varying degrees of slurs, and then his fans say, wow, Eminem is back, leading Eminem to decide that it's time to try his hand at not saying slurs. This creative cycle interests me because as a 30-year-old white guy who used to be a teenager, I grew out of liking Eminem many moons ago. But that enjoyment that I had for his first couple of albums still existed, and I just kind of accepted, hey, Eminem isn't good anymore, or maybe I just grew up. What can you do? The problem with this is that whenever Eminem rears his damn head, Team Shady gets really angry that I, a regular dude, don't appreciate him enough, and that critics are simply too stupid to appreciate Eminem's latest outing. So I've spent a couple of years pondering what it is that causes Eminem and his fans to be like that. I've got a handful of reasons, but before I go into those, I want to say this to Team Shady and the 30-somethings who really don't like rap and want it to be 2002 again. You are allowed to like Eminem. Nobody is saying you're dumb for liking Eminem. He is the most popular rapper who has ever lived. If you stop making that other people's problem, nobody will say anything. People make fun of you because you are insecure and demand to know why people don't like what you like. Let it go, like what you like, come back from the army. We're all worried about you. Initially, I wanted to start this off by checking if Eminem was actually reviewed poorly. I wanted to compare his general album reviews to other artists he has put beside as his peers to see if he is unfairly reviewed. But this realization made me scrap that. It doesn't matter if Eminem is reviewed poorly to me, it only needs to matter to him. Artists are very sensitive creatures who will hyperfixate on one negative take amidst 1,000 positive ones, but Eminem really takes this to another gear because lashing back at the critics is such a major part of his subject matter. So let's ignore the question of is Eminem actually reviewed poorly, and let's assume that that's a fact. Eminem is reviewed poorly, but why is he reviewed poorly? After all, critics are not a monolith, and they really only need to find one thing to be an issue before they review Eminem badly. So what we're going to do is break down reasons that Eminem might be reviewed poorly. The things that I've come up with are things that I think exist in the background of Eminem critiques, because it would be easy to say Eminem says slurs and now Gen Z is trying to cancel Eminem and ship this video. But I think that these are a bit more interesting to talk about, and also things that you might not find everywhere else. All in all, there are 7 core issues with Eminem as a rapper and as an artist. Some of these are very similar, but all of these are somewhat connected to what I think makes Eminem such a weird case in music. Let's talk about it.
May I have your attention, please?
Tracking an artist's creative journey through their music is very interesting. Take Metallica, for example. You can follow their albums and pinpoint when they stopped using riffs from Dave Mustaine. You can pinpoint when they got popular. You can pinpoint when music trends changed and when they fell apart without them ever having mentioned it because their artistic voice is so clear. Ignoring any quality differences between his work, Eminem's music is extremely simple to follow because he largely only has one subject to talk about, that being himself. If you break down the content of Eminem's albums, just the general ideas that he expresses through his art, they largely separate into 2 categories. How people reacting to him makes him angry, and nothing. There is exactly one outlier for this, that being the Slim Shady EP, which has its fair share of nothing, but also saw its 3 most substantial songs repurposed onto the Slim Shady LP. This is the only body of work that Eminem claims that you can argue is immune from the outside influence of critical reception that leads to him defensively making your mom angry. Slim Shady LP has a pretty solid mix of songs that were clearly recorded before anybody was hearing him because they are significantly better. Songs like Rock Bottom, Bad Meets Evil, or the EP songs are perfect. Then there are the songs that he made with Dr. Dre, being My Name Is, Guilty Conscience, and Role Model, which are all largely nothing but an egregious demand for people to notice how many pop culture references he can make vulgar. And then there's the rest of the album, which bounces between contrived stories about doing drugs that are devoid of metaphor or purpose, and sucking his dick about how offensive the album is. Largely speaking, I like the Slim Shady LP, but anybody who acts like Eminem has anything to talk about outside of the few songs that he made before he got with Dr. Dre and had to sell albums are insane people. But then Slim Shady LP sold 1 trillion copies, and a lot of people were pretty upset about how many times Marshall said curse words. A year later, the Marshall Mathers LP is released, and as much as I like the album because it's Eminem at his most charismatic, if you're looking for content, you're pretty much only going to get one subject from it. I'm famous, and I really don't like how many people I have to talk to because of it. In terms of tone, the standout song on the album is Stan, a dark storytelling song that is among Eminem's absolute best. But content-wise, even this is just a more serious take on the same idea as the album closer Criminal. That being, I am being ridiculous on purpose. Don't take what I'm saying seriously. It's an album full of a lot of anger at being famous and clearly not being ready to be famous. Eminem's show a few years later is less angry with the response to his last album. It better have been. That album sold 20 billion copies. But it's basically Eminem narrating the litany of problems with his life at the time. Those being censorship, custody battles, divorce, being sued by his mother, carrying a gun, contracting AIDS, and assaulting a bouncer. Eminem does attempt to tackle different ideas in Eminem's show, such as racial inequality, the status of celebrity worship, and the war to censor music and suppress free speech, which he does by relating all of these issues to the same root, that being himself. To be abundantly clear, I'm not saying that Eminem should be writing songs from the perspective of other people, which he's already done several times by this point. They just all happen to be talking to him in those songs because Eminem can't ponder a conversation that he isn't part of. But it's an extremely notable feature of his work through his first 3 albums that Eminem could not or would not step outside of himself for a moment to be able to say anything that wasn't expressly related to him. Eminem has a ton of influences, so let's compare him to someone like Nas. Nas' subject matter is always pretty similar, but take a song like I Gave You Power, an incredibly vivid story told from the perspective of a gun in the hands of young black men. The story is not about Nas shooting the gun, or Nas being shot by a gun, or Nas seeing someone get shot by a gun, but it's still an incredibly evocative story about the way this tool is used in these communities and how they're ravaged by this violence, and even attempts to stop it only enable and perpetuate more violence. Eminem doesn't have a single song this powerful because Eminem's only appeal at his peak is that he is essentially narrating his life in between nonsensical rapidy raps where he demonstrates how sick he can rhyme words. Post-Eminem show, his albums still follow this trend, but they also include Eminem's other passion, that being rapping for the sake of rapping. Encore, he tries to talk about a bunch of shit but misses the mark. Relapse, I think he was trying to recapture being edgy but forgot to also be good, so he just said nothing. Recovery is a lot of apologizing for relapse and also journeying into other kinds of songs, many of which were commercially successful, but personally I think are largely embarrassing. Marshall Mathers LP 2 is rapidy raps. Revival is I think him trying to be political and also pop, but good God. Kamikaze, he's angry at critics again, and Death of Slim Shady is just talking about how he's seen and perceived, only 20 years after he was a major celebrity. It's the only 2 things that Eminem has ever demonstrated the ability to rap about well: himself and nothing.
May I have your attention, please?
If Eminem's only thing to rap about besides himself is just the act of rapping, then it stands to reason that he must be great at that. And for the most part, he absolutely is. Eminem is almost assuredly peerless at the art of rhyming words. The actual technical ability of writing and delivering rhymes, Eminem is incredible at that. The only issue is twofold. 1, rhyming and rapping are not inherently the same. You can be the best rhymer and still have nothing interesting to say. And 2, you can absolutely overwrite your raps to the point that they are boring. Eminem, I think, mostly lands in the latter, because while he's always had a bit of an overwriting issue, good God, that man has lost the plot so badly. Now, you might be asking, what is overwriting in rap? If rapping is about painting a picture with your words, then surely more details are better, as it simply paints a more detailed mental image. Theoretically, this is true, but you can say a lot of words while also saying very little. The problem with Eminem as a writer is that even in his prime, he wants to rhyme more than he wants to paint a picture. The story he's telling is not the thing he cares about, as his verses are never metaphors or making a statement. The thing he cares about is the rhyme. Take his legendary verse on Forgot About Dre, which is an incredibly verse mostly on stage presence alone. Eminem proceeds to say the following. One day, I was walking by with a Walkman on when I caught a guy giving an awkward eye, so I strangled him up in the parking lot by his Carl Kanai. These lines are quintessential peak Eminem. Needlessly violent, charismatic, riddled with nonsense details, and a ton of little intricate rhymes. It's a great example of a little overwritten. It doesn't matter to the verse that Eminem has a Walkman or that the guy is wearing Carl Kanai, but it's fine. They rhyme and it sounds great. Compare this to Eminem's verse on EPMD 2, a remix to a Nas song that I believe is the only time that Nas and Eminem have ever been on a song together. EPMD, we're back in business, living in cramped conditions, we'll give you ammunition. I stocked those shelves, I got those shells like Taco Bell, and I'm not gonna fail. I got no L's like Christmas, you don't wanna make those claws come out. This is not pointing out that Eminem has cringe lines. Everyone's got cringe lines. The point is that this is about nothing, says nothing, achieves nothing, but it's a bunch of words that rhyme. And if you don't care about how intricate the rhymes are, then who the fuck is any of that for? The answer is that it's for Eminem, because he loves crafting the rhymes and altering his flows and connecting ideas in unique ways. And that's amazing for Eminem, but I don't want to hear it. This technical ability is what earns Eminem so much respect amongst his peers, because their appreciation is so much more based around technique and execution and the way the mind thinks about these things. It's similar to professional wrestling, where wrestlers themselves dote on Randy Orton and how he's the perfect wrestler because he's safe and moves well. But it took almost 20 years for viewing audiences to appreciate him because while he might be technically proficient, for the viewer, he is agonizingly boring. What is probably my favorite Eminem line in any verse that he's ever spit is also his most stupid. It doesn't contain any punchlines or meaning beyond exactly what it says. But this one line is exactly what I love about Eminem. I can't describe the vibe I get when I drive by 6 people and 5 I hit. To me, this line from Purple Pills is the perfect Eminem line. It has a lot of little rhymes, it's charismatic, it's violent, it's silly, but he moves on immediately. He doesn't dwell on it for 6 lines and give it unnecessary importance. He didn't hit a family of 3, he didn't detail how they hit his car, he didn't talk about which bones they broke, he didn't describe the car or the street. It's just a line about how he hit people with his car while he was on drugs. Somewhere along the way, Eminem forgot how to make a line in a song fun and just tried to make it technical. And in the process, Eminem forgot to make it interesting.
May I have your attention, please?
I want to take a quick detour. I promise it matters by the end, but it's gonna get a little weird. If you're an Eminem fan, you might not know this song because you don't like other rap songs, but Homecoming by Kanye West is some of his best work. Kanye isn't exactly known for his lyricism, but Homecoming is a perfectly written song about Kanye's hometown of Chicago, how it impacted him, and how he feels like an outsider after leaving when he became famous. This idea is beautifully delivered by relating all of the impact that Chicago had on him to a woman named Wendy that Kanye grew up with and who impacted him his entire life. Throughout the song, there are allusions to the reality of what he's talking about. For example, he references a line from earlier in the album about the Chicago skyline lighting up with the line, "When I grew up, she showed me how to go downtown, and at nighttime her face lit up, so astounding." The song is exceptionally written and a beautiful use of symbolism, but Kanye didn't really know how to end it, so the last line he says on the song is him outright saying that it's a metaphor, saying, "If you don't know by now, I'm talking about Chi-Town." This has always been a black spot on a perfect song for me, because it was never unclear that Kanye was talking about Chicago. It's just easy to express the feelings of love and loss through the lens of a relationship. Regardless, this is an amazing song that is the closest that Kanye came to being a songwriter. Eminem's discography is like if that last line was said first and then 6 more times throughout the verses. Kanye is not a better writer than Eminem. but I think it would be hard-pressed to convince me, for how blunt and tactless Kanye is as a lyricist, that he is not more subtle. I would actually argue that Eminem's fame and notoriety is expressly tied to his lack of subtlety or nuance. He says exactly what he thinks, he just makes it rhyme. That's Eminem's whole appeal. I think that this idea works well in 1999 when you're the most famous rapper in the world and your peers are extremely blunt DMX or this really happened head-ass Jay-Z. But in 2024, Eminem is standing beside people like Kendrick Lamar, who can be as blunt or as subtle as the art demands and still be impactful. So Eminem's brand of "I say what I think" really just rings out as hollow and artless, no matter how many words he rhymes. With all of this said about Eminem's writing and his lyricism, the funniest aspect of Eminem as a musician that illustrates just how unimaginative he can be is his producer run in the early 2000s. I don't really know why this happened. Suddenly, Eminem just starts getting a lot of play as a producer, being the primary producer of The Eminem Show and the 8 Mile soundtrack, but then he's also given the task of producing a bunch of posthumous Tupac songs. The songs are mostly fine. I think his drums are a little basic and his loops are very simple, but I'm not a producer, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But Eminem had this very funny habit of the most blunt sample work that has ever happened in hip-hop, maybe. Everybody knows Stan. Everybody knows that the Dido chorus is a major part of what makes a song work, and everyone knows that the original song is extremely different and is an upbeat acoustic song that is flipped to be extremely dark. The producer of this song is a man named 4-5 King, and he did a great job with it. Oh, fun fact, by the way, the same producer who made Stan made Hard Knock Life for Jay-Z, which makes Stan the second best rap song produced by 4-5 King to prominently feature a sample that has been recontextualized. I think Eminem loved this flip and the impact the song had more than anybody realized, because for a time, Eminem loved taking a sample of a song, blaring the chorus from it that says this is exactly what the song is about, and then puts his drums under them, thinking he did something. Sing for the Moment from Eminem's Show, Dying to Live by Tupac and Biggie, Ghetto Gospel, which is my personal favorite Tupac song, Like Toy Soldiers from Encore, probably so many more that I'm not thinking of, are all so funny because the beats are literally just sample and drums. I don't think this is inherently bad. I actually think all of these songs are incredibly good, but this is the exact level of depth of production that I would have.
May I have your attention, please?
There was a narrative going around during Eminem's big comeback with Recovery that Eminem is amazing because he raps about real things and isn't just rapping about guns and drugs and money. As a quick aside, are we able to acknowledge that this was racist yet? Or are we still hiding behind not actually saying a race so it's not racist? Praising artists in a predominantly black genre for not adhering to things propped up as status symbols in said culture because you deem them ghetto and ignorant is still racist even if you're talking about a black artist. Ignoring that Eminem has a very long track record of rapping about guns, drugs, and money, rappers are not more or less valuable based on how they interact with these subjects. Stop saying that shit, you sound stupid as fuck. Putting all that aside, this actually does touch on a real point. Eminem is bad at sounding like a rapper. You could say this is a good thing. Eminem carved out his own style, separate from everyone else's, but Eminem's style isn't novel. His execution isn't unique outside of his technical ability. We've already talked about his subject matter and his artistic depth. So really, the only thing that sets Eminem apart is that he was big enough to be an entire subgenre unto himself, one that felt extremely awkward when it intersected with anything that wasn't his immediate group of friends. Going back to rapping about guns and drugs, I don't think that rapping about these things should define your relationship to rap. That's not all rap is, and if Eminem never spoke on these things, he could still be a quality rapper. But Eminem also talked about those things, just in a very different way than any other rapper was. I don't know if anybody ever looked into it, but Eminem really loves the idea of guns at concerts. His tours always involve a comical amount of gun references. Encore and Eminem Show are meant to evoke his life as a performance for the public. Eminem Show talks a lot about how much he loves guns, and Encore has like 6 references to shootings, specifically at concerts. When I'm Gone on Curtain Call ends with him shooting himself at a concert in Sweden. It's so strange. I think more strange than other rappers who just talk about guns because they're scary or as a metaphor. One of rap's biggest features is the bravado and ego of its participants. So much of that machismo sinks into every bit of the rapper's persona no matter how they express it. but Eminem sounding cocky or bragging or declaring he's great always felt very disingenuous when he was beside other rappers. A great example of this is how weird he sounds on Bitch Please 2, a filler track from the Marshall Mathers LP with Dre, Snoop, and Exhibit. Everyone else just does basic brag raps, and Eminem complains about a music journalist who didn't like his last album. Remember Me from the same album, same sort of thing. Just Eminem, RBX, and Sticky rapping, and then Eminem complains about critics saying he swears too much, and then references Columbine. Eminem with rappers that aren't his friends always sounded incredibly uncomfortable, or just decided to make an entirely different song, like with EPMD 2 earlier. You might be thinking, well, Forrest, what about Renegade? He bodied Jay-Z on his own song, something Eminem fans have been saying since Nas said it on Ether like it wasn't 20 years ago. Well, that's a bit of a technicality. That song wasn't a Jay-Z song. It was a song with Eminem and Royce da 5'9" that Royce didn't get to put on his album. So Eminem gave it to Jay-Z and Jay-Z put verses on it. Eminem also spends that entire fucking song complaining that society doesn't like him, by the way, in case you thought I was exaggerating that this is all he talks about. Another thing that Eminem is given credit for that isn't true. Eminem is bad at storytelling, at least for a high-class rapper. Outside of exceptional examples like Stan and 97 Bonnie and Clyde, Eminem has never demonstrated his ability to tell stories that aren't completely exaggerated and ridiculous. If you compare Eminem to rappers that people would unquestionably place below him skill-wise, like DMX or Joe Budden, then it's insane how flawed Eminem is at this. Both Joe Budden and DMX are also known for their bluntness, but DMX's Damien, a story about DMX succumbing to evil because his association with the devil keeps bringing him success, is viewed with such a haunting level of commitment while also being subtle enough to not outright say Damien is the devil. Joe Budden's Ordinary Love Shit 3 is a story about an incredibly toxic relationship, but it has so many ups and downs emotionally that it's impossible to not feel like you go on the journey with Joe. He gets angry, he gets desperate to make it work, he hates her, he loves her, and through every small story, you're a passenger on the emotional roller coaster. Eminem cannot do the same thing with his stories, again, outside of these two exceptional examples. Eminem's bad at having fun. I don't know how you're bad at having fun, but Eminem has always been terrible at enjoying himself in his music. What's the most fun Eminem song? Is it Purple Pills? What a psycho.
May I have your attention, please?
If Eminem only raps about himself, is bad at rapping about other things, bad at being around other artists, and only ever gets praised for his rhyming and not his artistic vision or ability to make music, you might be asking what the fuck it is that made Eminem the most popular rapper. And I have two answers. The first one is a little less heavy. You know how Taylor Swift is comically famous, and it feels weird because you can just not hear any of her music for a month at a time, but then she has an insane fan base that will kill and die for her? There are a lot of reasons for that, but one of the major ones that has always been Taylor Swift's in with people is that her style of songwriting is a blend of personal details and very obvious metaphor. But Taylor Swift's brand of celebrity is one that encourages and invites a personal investment. Swift writes about exactly what she's been going through, and since she is a very famous woman, people who are invested in the Taylor Swift story can follow her life and say, this song is written about this specifically, and you feel like you're part of that journey. Now, replace Taylor Swift with Eminem, and that's one of the major reasons. Only who he connects with are 30-something men who need to come back from the army. Eminem albums that are considered good always have a very obvious through line that is inspired by his personal mindset at the time. And where artists like Kendrick Lamar or Kanye West will use that headspace to create art, Eminem's music is very directly about his feelings on exact verifiable situations. On Marshall Mathers, the Insane Clown Posse dissed him, his mother is suing him. On Soldier, he assaulted a bouncer, pled guilty to a felony gun charge. On Yellow Brick Road, he tells a meandering story about his frustrations about being ostracized by black culture that led him to making racist songs that ended up leaking. Later in his career, the song Headlights is a song about his relationship with his mother that builds off of his previous songs about her. Kamikaze is almost entirely about specific things said about his Revival album. If you're invested in the Eminem story and you've been following these threads, these songs are all incredibly fulfilling and feel like a climax of a journey. But if you aren't on the Eminem train and listen to him because you want to hear music from someone labeled the best rapper of all time, what is appealing about these songs? It's why Eminem fans have such a hard time reconciling why critics don't like Eminem's newer music. Critics aren't reviewing things as dedicated fans. They generally assess how things are as art for someone who is generally a new listener. This is what the idea of separating the art from the artist actually means, judging if something is viable as art without considering who it's from. And as someone who used to like Eminem, who knows a lot of this stuff, his music is not terribly good as music. This is a genuinely hard thing for Eminem and his fans to come to terms with because they're in that bubble. But let's say that they know that Eminem's music is made for Eminem fans, but they just want people to respect the technical ability of Eminem, to recognize his greatness even if you don't like him. This is only feasible if Eminem is respected in a different way than guys like Nas and Jay-Z, but instead is more respected like Lupe Fiasco, an incredibly talented lyricist who has his appeal and massive respect, but he doesn't play the game enough to have knockout albums. Eminem isn't regarded that way. He's regarded as the greatest of all time, and he just isn't that. He does so few things that other rappers can do. He's just incredibly honest, and that connects with people because it's not traipsed in metaphors or scary imagery.
May I have your attention, please?
This reason is where we'll end, and it's gonna go a little bit deeper than just Eminem, but stick with me. Time is always moving forward, and every generation is a little bit more progressive than the one before it. But in the last several decades, there has been a pretty definitive swinging back and forth when it comes to how government and culture helped shape where we are. The 50s and early 60s were largely very sanitized and what we call traditional. The late 60s and early 70s are much more progressive, with second-wave feminism and young people rejecting the Vietnam War that gives way to the conservative 1980s. The 80s sought to censor expression and harken back to the old days of traditionalism, which gave way to the early 90s, which responded to the Puritan push by being unkempt and violent in the counterculture boom. As the decade wore on, though, the glorification of violence personified through popular music came to a head, with heretical figures famously blaming music and video games as influences for tragedies like Columbine, seeking to censor music to protect the children. These movements combined with post-9/11 fervor to place people on opposite sides of a culture war, those who wish to police and those who wish to not be policed. This schism saw a massive rise and an almost tactical level of offensiveness take shape in a backlash to aggressive attempts at censorship. Eminem was part of this movement as the young presenting super talented but super offensive rapper that could represent the youth in a way that almost nobody could. He could make your mom and the government angry. He looked like you. He wasn't talking about gangs or industry politics, but instead he was attacking the people who told him not to cuss. There were other figures at this time who would really push this appeal. Radio shows like Opie and Anthony gathered a cult fan base for their vulgar and revealing styles of comedy. Dave Chappelle became a figure who was tapped into culture in ways that other sketch comedians simply seemed disconnected from. Sports like mixed martial arts surged to prominence as a shocking alternative to the largely traditional and stuffy boxing. The early 90s to mid-2000s is a massive boom of these styles of soft protest against Puritan culture that wants to police how you talk and how you act for their own sensibilities. These still famous artists are tied to this era, the post-90s media boom that saw entertainment and politics become intertwined in a way that would later prove permanent. And for many of these artists, those ties have aged incredibly poorly. The problem with the soft protesting progressivism of the early 2000s is that without progressive sentiments behind your acts of protest, the mindset of these actions are largely just saying, "Don't tell me what to do." And when they're asked to replicate their points of progressivism for future generations, they respond with bitter contempt. This sect of artists and the fans they gathered are all 20 years older, likely in their 30s or 40s or even 50s. And their formative years were spent fighting a battle for freedom of speech. And to a lot of these people, this war is still continuing. But because they never had morals or progressive ideology behind their fight, many of these same people have continued to fight as the opponents have changed. It's easy to come to the conclusion that "don't say these bad words" is a universal sentiment to fight when you've been fighting on some vague principle of personal freedom. But being 20 with Puritan Christians telling you not to say swear words because they don't think it's appropriate, and being 40 with trans people telling you that normalizing jokes made at their expense is incredibly dangerous to them are not the same battle. But you have so many people acting like it is because the phrase "don't say this" triggers something in their lizard brain. It's why someone like Joe Rogan could be perceived as liberal in the 2000s and be staunchly Republican in 2024 without ever changing his stance. Political lines didn't change that much, but the messengers did, and someone like Joe Rogan didn't update his perspective to consider that. Their mindsets are still demanding that you don't tell them what to do. This is the problem that Eminem and his older fan base fail to reconcile. Speaking of Eminem's fans first, a lot of them yearn for the days when they were younger and felt empowered to speak their minds. A guy like Eminem being that famous and saying swears your mom didn't want you to hear was visceral. And it's probably hard to, in that same lifetime, be told that was actually bad in a different way than you've ever had to understand. It's why there's such a weird defensiveness around this idea that Gen Z is trying to cancel Eminem. And the only real defense seems to be he was doing this when they were in diapers. These people are just defending things that are their version of normal, and accepting that it was bad is a really difficult thing to do, as has been seen in every single generation that has gone by. Eminem, I think, is a bit more complex. I don't think Eminem is the same as guys like Dave Chappelle, guys who were young and rebellious but grew up into self-serving, disconnected losers who let themselves be tricked into being bigots. I think Eminem is stuck between an artist's version of Arrested Development and being unable to reconcile the split in his and his audience's desires. Eminem got very famous very quickly by saying bad words and rapping about drugs. He responded by saying that he hates being famous over and over and got angry at every bit of fame he encountered while openly fantasizing about dying or disappearing from the public eye. When he did just that and could come back, he had nothing to say, but he had to rap. And every step of the way, people asked him why he wasn't the same as he used to be. So Eminem tried to be scary and creative, and that got rejected. He tried to be a famous rapper, and that works okay, but he doesn't like being a famous rapper. He tries to revisit those grounds, but it doesn't hit the same. He tries to be political and speak about things that matter to him, and it's rejected. Then he's angry again, and people seem to enjoy it. I think that Eminem has never had to develop a skill set that saw him do anything except what was natural during his peak, and is uncomfortable with his legacy of saying offensive things, but he doesn't know how to do anything else. It's why his recent concept album is met with mixed reviews. He wants to be able to explore his feelings about his legacy and come to terms with it and try to move on. But he also wants to satisfy those fans who were with him on the journey by saying the things that built that legacy. This is the preachiest that I'll get here, but maybe this will make sense to one person who hadn't considered it. Eminem could say slurs the good way all day long. But if you are ironically saying slurs, and someone who is homophobic hears you saying slurs and feels emboldened to say them because the famous man is saying them, then the intent that you had with saying the slurs does not matter. There are just now two people saying slurs. Do I think that Eminem intends to empower bigots with his music? No. I think that Eminem is 50 and grew up talking away and was never incentivized not to. But if that's the case, then Eminem and his fans have to live with that and stop making it other people's problem. A lot of people have been radicalized by the internet into thinking that cancel culture is looming around the corner if you've ever said anything bad. So they feel forced to defend anybody who says something bad because it could be them next. But Eminem's own music will tell you that people were not okay with him saying slurs the entire time. There is no cancel culture coming for you, Jordan. You're in your 30s, and what you're experiencing is backlash for saying that gay people are an abomination. And despite what right-wing psychos will tell you, it is a very good thing that people will give backlash to that more now than they did when you were 15. There's not a lot else to say about this subject. Eminem is reviewed poorly because he is a limited artist that can only appeal to his own fans who cannot get over their own victim complex despite Eminem being the most popular rapper of all time. It's childish and it's sad, but they have no incentive to change. What can you do?
I remember all those years I was when you were here. I I remember how it was when you were young. Yesterday was so long ago. Kid Rock and Limp Bizkit came along now. Don't nobody wanna hear your old ass sing no more. 'Cause I remember all those years, how it was when you were here. I remember how it was when you were young. Yesterday was so long ago. Kid Rock and Limp Bizkit came along now. Don't nobody wanna hear your old ass sing no more.